It'll turn to king as excellent tasting wine. Come, Elros, try it.
I have the dwarves in my charge.
Alright, my friends. This is the Fat Man. We're looking at another Middle-earth adventure from Iron Crown Enterprises, The River Running, based on J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. There was a pertinent reason why I tried to add the little clip I did talking about Thundel's wine cellar and his hectic taste for expensive, elaborate wine. The question, of course, is where did the wine come from? Yes, I'm sure the elves have some limited wild growing grapevines and maybe some that they tend in some of the more secluded areas of Mirkwood, but Mirkwood's not exactly, it's a forest, it's an old forest, it's not really conducive towards large areas of wine production. And then we could look at Long Lake and Escroth, or Lake Town. The truth is that as a trading community, it's well established. While there may be some limited production, it's probably more based off of beer and ale and materials that. Yes, Frankie. Oh, that was Cat. Yes, you trying to get in the window again? Yeah, back in there. Just don't drop it, knock everything down. The odds are that once again they don't produce it. They're tradesmen. They are bringing it. They're acting as middlemen from someplace else. Could it be coming up from the south, from Gondor, up the Anduin? Yes, some of it probably does. Limited numbers and various amounts, keeping in mind that there are at least one or two critical areas where freighting the material around like the falls or Ruros would be quite detriment. And when you add the aggressive times of different times of history along the Anduin, some years or decades would be much more conducive to that sort of trade, southern trade, than not. And so we look further east to an area called Dorwinion, or the Land of Wine, or the Land of Maidens. And it's located, this is the Sea of Rhun, and it's south by southeast of Mirkwood. And it is its own little ecosphere in some aspects. You have Mordor to the south, but for the lion's share part, it's the easterling tribes coming in from east and southeast that are passing through to get to the west and cause problems that are their worst inclinations, because they're in good condition, or good terms with their western kingdoms and things like this. And so I imagine that it makes a difference. So, and we'll read this little caption. The door in the Land of Maidens flanks the eastern end of the River Running, where it flows into the Sea of Rhun. Headed by traders and diplomats, the realm is famed for its magnificent wines. Casks of sparkling wine, subtle red, sweet roses travel to all ends of the Middle Earth. Despite its location on the frontiers of Gondor, Dorwinion is not ignored by the dreaded necromancer who looks in Mirkwood, monstrous beasts, blah, blah, blah. So there's still some run-ins and some issue, which should be accepted. But if we look at their location, the River Running reads up to Long Lake from Lake Town. Lake Town benefits from a lot of trade that comes up and down this river, and then from there it can travel overland once upon a time to get to Anduin, or up some of the tributaries as far as it can get, travel north to the Iron Hills and the Dwarves in the Iron Hills. And I imagine that the further west you go, the more valuable, more subtle bouquets will make their way to places like Rivendell and Linden, possibly Bree and the Shire, or prior to that, Arnor, where all these regions have their own versions of winemaking, but and you can grow wine in quite a few different environments. We do that. We have a fairly robust wine growing community in central and south central Iowa and southeastern Iowa that's beginning to develop a reputation for good stuff. But once again, the area, the regions play a part in the quality or the flavor of a given substance. So that would play out why the Land of Maidens is one such thing. We have And this is my second attempt at doing this today. I got partway through it and my computer crashed, which is probably, like I said, I run at the very high CPU trying to use this program. So the fact of the matter is possibly hitting the ceiling on what I can do and what I can't do with this particular laptop. I need to eventually, hopefully when summer comes, things straighten out at work and go well. I can afford to buy an updated, newer, larger machine, because this one's coming on it's over 2 years old now, and it's served me quite well for 2 years. It's just now starting to develop some issues with crashing on high-end things like this, or if I try to play a video game with it, depending on the game. So we got introduction. So the Dorwinion is a land that contrasts its surroundings in history, politics, culture, people, economics, and geography. The Land of Maidens separates it from the neighbors. Though set apart by nature and inclination, Dorwinion have made a successful society through compromise with very different peoples that share their borders. Those who dwell in the wine land make a practice of getting along with strangers. It is said commerce is the lifeblood of the Dorwinion, and conflict the enemy of their aspirations. Hospitality and good business are the hallmarks of these Dorwinion citizens. So we get the history and politics. Basically, the history is sometime at late first age, early second age, men started to settle in the Dorwinion region along the northwestern shores of the Lake of Rhun, and found the land to be conducive to agriculture and to settlement. So, and they are an amalgamation of everybody around them. So Western Northmen, maybe some Numerians and Gondorians, later years, Easterlings commingle and marry and settle and develop this kind of a unique descendant race. Dorwinion allowed to be descendants of the North, and goes on and on about that. Politics, mostly neutral in the deadly game of changing alliance in politics. Left to their own devices, Dorwinion would much prefer to go on supplying goods and services to others to require, and they would like to shun armed conflict and conquest as is endemic to the power struggles of the region. Fortunately, that's not always possible. So when they're forced to fight, they fight very, very viciously. But for the lion's share, they try to mediate, they try to negotiate, they try to act as the middlemen for other people's conflicts to help minimize any overflow into their region and to help their the neighbors get along a little better, which sets them apart a little bit from a lot of other humans politics and human kingdoms and settlements and tribes and things that seem to go on in Middle Earth. The Dorwinion also cultivate the dwarves of the Eastern Mountains. They possess a natural meteorological resources and skills or valued prospects of the Dorwinion. More of the commercially oriented, shrewd Dorwinion feel a certain kinship with a careful business-like dwarves. Mutual pursuit of profit or opportunities serve to meld both races together to a larger degree than is true to their other neighbors in the region. The Dorwinion are uneasy but fast allies with the elves of Roman. The natural heir superior to the elvish folk project to the Dorwinion merchants and traders is somewhat of a sticking point. The reclusiveness of the elves and the natural ongoing nature of the Dorwinion cause the two cultures to clash unmercifully. Still, when in contact, the Dorwinion, for their part, is civil and courteous. The many enemies on many sides, the citizens of the wineland will obliged to cultivate even the haughty elves. So the thing here, and we'll go back to this map briefly, is there's a little mountain chain here, and there's dwarven settlements here, and I don't think that they're related to, there's no mention of them being related to Durin's folk or the folks, the two tribes further west. I think they're from one of the obviously one of the eastern tribes, or they're a sub-tribe of their own. Just like there's a wooded area here to the north of Rhun, or the Lake of Rhun, and it's fairly extensive. I mean, it's not massive. It's not quite as big as Lothlorien. Well, yeah, it may be close to it anyway. And there is I don't call it a kingdom, but there are a group of Sylvan elves in there for sure, and maybe not quite as organized as Thundrel's kingdom, or definitely not Lothlorien, but they're still there. It's the implication that elves are not only located in a few remaining pockets, but there are others, and they do interact with their local communities. Meanwhile, a lot of the trade that the Dorwinion do travel up the river running to Lake Town, and from Lake Town, the Lake Town merchants distribute it to Thundrel and other people, and hence the chain of how these sort of things kind of would play out. It's not to say that some of the Dorwinion traders don't directly go to these far-flung places themselves. It's just implying that, you know, there's a bigger picture. The culture, the Dorwinion practice rich variety of culture diversion, prone to extravagant communications. They are naturally demonstrative. The average Dorwinion is an enthusiastic public speaker and actor. They are to practice wildly and supported well, even by normally careful, shrewd businessmen. Nowhere in Middle Earth save the elvish lands, perhaps amidst the great cities of Gondor in its prime, where there are more bards to be found or more celebrations in progress. People themselves, so I guess it's a little bit, we've already touched on their physical looks, economics, built around trade, geography, which we've already talked about. So we get into our first adventure, and this is where my computer crashed this last attempt. So let's see if we can't get through this. The corruption of the Dorwinion Wood, Dorwinion and Cardan, the town near the wood, primary NPCs. Let's see, it goes on. They got some pretty wordy stuff here. So the inhabitants of Cardan, the winewood, now leers over them like a threatening storm cloud. During the past 3 months, the local animals that kept in the village have begun to slowly disappear, starting with the smallest piglets and lambs and working up to chickens, calves, and even pet dogs. In the last month, 7 children of the village have disappeared while at play and not returned. Determined searches of the area have yielded only tracks and occasional odd toy or piece of clothing, all or in leading towards the forest. Winewood itself is shrouded in gray and oppressive benevolence. Hunters report the forest sometimes partially darkened even in the full daylight, and there is an unnatural, mysterious foreboding, almost menacing air about the place. Wild tales of trees moving to block trails and shifting impede the searchers. Birds and small game fill the forest eaves are gone. The villagers are fearful of setting foot into the suddenly dark and threatening wood. Last week, a young woman has also disappeared, apparently while searching the wood alone for her missing child. This week, a small party of rivermen have arrived from the nearby banks of the Sultan, inquiring after a wealthy merchant who left inland last week. The merchant employed these men to load wine he intended to purchase in the village for shipment back to inland. Merchant was also to meet them at Cardigan, but has not been heard of anywhere in town. Villagers are not a particularly martial people, but a growing benevolence that would have caused some of the local hunters began training with the use of arms in earnest. Wealthier wine-owning families, known in the Cardan as the wine lords, have proposed sponsoring a local militia to stop the disappearance. No one was willing to travel the road to Lemon and leads to the wine wood. So our current NPCs, the chief people player characters will run across into. It is assumed that the gathering of hunters, the rivermen. So, at some point, here's the local community, the woods. In a nutshell, what we have is an individual who has turned to the kind of twisted and dark, and has become under the influence of some of the Dark Lord's cult, what they call the cult of the Long Night. Legos is the man behind the growing evil in the winewood. In fact, is completely unguessed by the Cardan, where Legos is forced his brother to flee in disgrace, forfeit his share of his inheritance on the sudden death of their father. He has not openly set foot in the village since its time, but he does return now and visit his mentor and ally, Valgeva, at night. Legos is completely fascinated by nature and by the study of animal plants, also drawn to the art of magic. He was captivated by Valgeva and her knowledge of the animals and magic power. When his brother Talos used Legos' association with old women to ruin him, Legos resolved to take revenge on his brother and the whole town. Legos decided to follow Legos' advice completely and become an active agent for the cult of the Long Night. Legos began journeying to the citadel of Dol Guldur with letters and a recommendation from Valgavia. He then secured assistance he required to convert his scheme to reality. This included ancient tomes and legends of Hurons and their nature and animation, the magical tests necessary to speed the growth of plants and create new darkness of Duran through a selective stimulation of overhead foliage. And last but far from least, the clutch of freshly laid giant spider eggs suitable for transplanting from the necromancer's realm in Mirkwood to the peaceful forest of Winewood. Again, now provides him with advice, roles, For spot applications of gloom, Legos has trapped and transported some giant bats, which he can no longer control. With his help, Legos has become an animus of some ability and extreme cleverness. Legos is it's Leigos, Legos, however you want to pronounce it, closely resembles his brother, except he is shorter and tends to be rough, laugh self-consciously at inappropriate moments. The elder relative is torn by his plan, which wreaks the revenge on the town, but also hurts the local hunters. His boyfriend, friends, and only faction that stuck by him when he fled the town in disgrace. Perhaps because of some inner turmoil, Legos seems to always be close to anger and violence. So, that's what's causing the problem. Here's this little location of the giant dead tree. And so with some assistance from NPCs, the PCs are going to be either inspired and hired or inclined to go on investigate and figure out what's going on. The disappearances, try to find the disappeared children and the young woman and the missing merchant. Fastness of the wood, some key locations around the town itself. Dorwinion wood. Here's the interior of the giant dead tree, or great dead tree that's become the cavern and or hideout of Legos and his experiments. The missing merchant, the great dead tree in detail, the task, starting the players. So, task depends on reinforcement abilities of the party adventurers. Dennis Kelja and a collection of wine lords are offering a substantial reward for the solution of the mystery at the end of the disappearances. To qualify for the reward, the mystery of the newly menacing wood must be explained, evidence must be produced, all surviving victims must be rescued, proof must be offered that evil has been vanquished. The plight of Curtis is widely discussed on the trade routes along with the reward and the necessary means to claim it. Most Dorwinion would prefer not to lead such an expedition, but some might be willing to participate in exchange for an appropriate level of reward. The resourceful party should be able to secure help and carve it down. And short of attempting to rid the winewood of its emerging malevolence, the cautious party adventurers might attempt to learn the nature of the menace, sell the information off to the town, who fervently desire to either earn the reward themselves or end the reign of terror to those in town. The politics of the town are such that several factions may be played off against each other. Yes? What are you doing? Yeah, I hear you. A rescue cat downstairs making some digging around, nosing around. Naturally, any mislaid treasure turns up, of course, in this occasion. So what we're looking at is that Legos has tried to have hatched the eggs and are trying to teach the giant spiders to capture and bind various entities. And of course, he had to start small, hence the beginning of the missing animals. And then the children, the spiders are slow to learn, and they're not as intelligent until they grow up in age, and they're resisting his attempts to bind them up and bind things and not try to poison them to death. So he's working on that. Plus, he's also managed to animate one or two herons to cause some more chaos and problems within the woods. So it's a number of different things that can be so he talks about some of that stuff. Anyway, so there's the beginning of that. And then we have the next adventure, which is the hijacked wine barge. Basically, it's kind of straight cut and forward. You've got a barge full of wine and a clever foreign orc and his misery band has managed to figure out how to board. Found a narrow spot in the river and figured out how to board ships or barges and take them over. Trading line up the Selden, the tail. Says here, several miles north of Karlasugra is just past a quiet bend in the Selden where the mighty river narrows somewhat to pass through a patch of rough terrain. A band of Urk warriors have finally hit the big time. For several weeks, between the looting of the countryside and committing general Urkish beastliness on the locals, the Urk have been trying to figure out how to raid one of those fat wine barges crawling up the river, and they're successful. Of course, a lot of booze gets drank, and a lot of orcs are now pretty much, it'd be an easy. If you can get on board and recapture the ship, it won't be too tough because most of the orcs are pretty much soused. There's some key NPCs, including one who's a spy for this necromancer. There's our clever orc and his tricks, basically using vines to swing out over and land on top of the bridge, or then his next attempt, which was successful, was to string a big, huge rope across the narrow spot of the river and catch the barge long enough for his compadres to jump aboard and get it. So there's a little picture of the ship, the narrows, the terrain, the bridge, the ship itself, and the various entities, the riverbank, the town of Karsuga, and there's a picture of the town, the task. Garvin Haddock is convinced time of his absolute essence. He's been aboard an hour since he lost his fight aboard the Maid of Calvin and was hurled into the river. He owns the boat. Government believes the orcs will certainly waste time celebrating and drinking portions of the cargo. If the rescue party get organized quickly and dispatched upriver before the orcs finish their celebration, his men and goods will be mostly saved. Pretty straightforward for rewards, status. There you go. Then we have the third adventure, Gargoyles of the Harridan. This one's a little bit more intricate and complicated because in Lord of the Rings, they don't have gargoyles. It's not one of the normal beastly magical creatures that you can cross. These are some sort of experiment in Dolgar that kind of, I don't know, they become very difficult to control and eventually escaped, and there's like a handful of them. And while they take on a lot of the attributes of the gargoyles, they are animated creatures and not truly animated rock. You see the ancient collapsing citadel Harridan is the center of legend, triggering on the inhabitants of the region. So, small town sits on the north fork of the main river, junction to the south fork of the Minera, major road near the later reaches blah blah. Suddenly, people are being harassed as they move along the road and along the river. Trouble began with the discovery of a mutilated corpse of a merchant on the Menharden Trail that bypasses toll collection points of the main road, skirting on the very eaves of the Harridan to rejoin the North Folk and the Menara further west. The men of Harridan regularly patrol the toll guards from City, who are assigned to, the corpse appeared, all seen with eerie and unnatural kind of excruciating detail. Was positioning a body which was draped over a stout branch 20 feet up an enormous oak tree. So on and so forth. The gargoyles. Deep within the pits of Citadel Dolgar is sorcerer's labyrinth and torture chambers, breeding pits, alchemy laboratories, experimental surgeries, and zoological facilities. Necromancer nurtures his darkest and most foul ambitions on these abysmal, stinking dens. It was in one of these dark holes the first attempts to improve the orc species began long ago, and eventually led the Urkai and later Oghai warriors. The gargoyles' latest products is diabolical research. Creatures unique and individual, both their bodies and their thought patterns are different from one gargoyle to the other. As a group, they were abused. I see some pictures of them there. Mistreated. Indulged even by the standards of the Dark Lord's minions to make them tough. They were routinely beaten and tortured to make them lean and efficient. They were fed very little and forced to compete among themselves for their fair shares. They were pitted against armed opponents in fatal combat again and again. From the original 17 creatures, only 5 were still alive. Due to their sorcerous nature, gargoyles have special characteristics, etc., etc. So this is what you're encountering. You got to find them. You got to counter them. You deal them. And you defeat them, and there's individuals. So one of them is considered called the warrior, another one the tracker, the conjurer, the hider, the talker. So you can see each one has a different personality and skill set. Band of orcs that also occupies the Harridan, and a completely luckless and depressing tribe of villains wandering a place looking for trouble, and they keep getting their butts whooped. Townsfolk, some key NPCs. At the end of the day, that's the goal. Figure out what these things are, encounter them, defeat them, get rewarded, get paid. So there's the town, the key places in the town, the ruined tower that the gargoyles are hanging out in, Arcanan Forest, that's nearby, different places. task, starting players, age, rewards. Right. Right. Okay, so Carnage at Fordham. That's our number 4 tale. And I need to pause for a second, folks, so please bear with me. Alright, back again, and hopefully that won't cause it to crash. Because we're so far into this thing. The Carnage at Fordham. Wineland superiors, sometimes Polaris, people of Dorwinion have held their homes and vineyards through countless years of strife, raids, and senseless violence from their nomadic neighbors. Although the Dorwinion would like nothing better than live in peace and prosper with the trade, aggressive people such as the Sagath and Asdric have often had different aspirations. These Dorwinion raiders are not only the menace, the more dangerous, numerous orc tribes of the Dark Lord roving at night in secret. These marauding orcs spread terror all along the borders of Dorwinion. Lands south of Dorwinion, especially at risk due to their sparse population. There's little help to be spared from Shellcran for defense for these far-flung outpost villages or relatively small bands of orcs from far away the eastern eaves of Mirkwood. Forests sometimes carry away whole villages, leaving little but smoking ruins that mark their former captives. For years, the realm masters and Cheryl Crane, that's the capital of Dorwinion, by the way, has surmised that these raiders sell their captives into slavery at the southern caravan routes, or perhaps they're dragged into the blackness of the great forest of Mirkwood. Only the presence of the earthing, i.e. the Rohirrim settlements are in the area lends any stability to Dorwinion border. For the most part of the government, the Shell Crane is powerless to stop these forays on the sparsely settled outer frontier. The size of the power parties and the number of villages to protect the guards are at the disposal of realm masters spread too thinly to do more than sacrifice themselves in vain. The most recent disaster struck with the southwestern village of Fordham. The tiny settlement was located at the furthest reach of Dorwinion into the Rohirrim Plain. It bordered the territory of the Osram. Fordham was very recently settled, having been established only several years ago. The tiny village relied on its harvest of grapes being shipped by wagon up the North Fork of the Manroman to the central marshalling point of the far bank near Carfus. From there, the grapes were loaded into barges shipped up to Dun and selling to the wineries in the Old Donna River Valley, etc., etc. So, basically, a handful of survivors come back and find their entire village has been captured. There's a couple of roving elves from Thunder's realm that can that harass the orcs, and they can give additional information and potentially assist in recovering. The young Dorwinion fighters are really out of their friendship. They would be one of the liability. So 2 young folk from the village return, trying to, reclaim their people before the raiders get to the place where they're going to sell or take them to Mirkwood themselves. So we get the roads, the tails, the plains, the train, the Reaper. The orc band is led by an impressive brute of an Urk known to his followers as Dolgrist, i.e. Head Cleaver, or the Reaper. Spawned is a normal orcish name. Reapers thought to have disgraced at some point, though some lapse of courage or orcish etiquette. Perhaps he was nice to an imp. At any rate, he has been a lifetime of trying to make up for it through senseless brutality and random bloodshed. What are you doing? No, Frankie, you don't need that. Come on, Frankie. Yes, I know. You're just squirming around too much and trying to dig into corners. It'll knock stuff down. You go find some place to lay down. You were doing fine here until just now. The train, the roads, the trails, the plains, typical canyon. The task. Depending on the strength and mobility of adventurers, party task to rescue poor souls captured by the Reaper's band. Time is not on the side of the rescuers. Every league orcs leave. And think of that, the chase after Meriden and Pippin when Saruman's orcs get their hands on them, right back to the same spot. Get away from whatever that is. I will throw that away so it no longer pesters you. Yes. Why can't you get fat and lazy like Squeaky? Anyway, so it's basically that. You got a clock running. chase these guys, chase the orc band down, recover the villagers, what there is left of them, and do so before they get to a place where you are outnumbered and you can't succeed. Right? Awesome options for combat and so on and so forth. Here's the chase. Nice little. All right. Reaper's dirty tricks. Of course, he's not going to play fair. Then we get to the number 5 adventure, The Wounded Drake. And this is another kind of straightforward. The mines north don't touch with thoughts of dragons, north of the comfortable, south of the favorite territory, the ancient worms, away north in the arid Marthan, with the hearth. Also, many settlements attempt to dragons pallet between the lands of maidens and the frosty steppes of the withered hearth. However, the Dorwinion is content with the commerce way of life, adventure exciting, not much so much. The Dorwinion would likely risk his daily comfort for it. However, under the right conditions, pursuit of profit can overcome geography and good sense. The small northern Dorwinion village of Hardafan of circumstances about become right. Basically, a tale comes in that there is a worm that's a small dragon that's gotten pretty well mauled and is either dying or dead, and even a dead dragon has lots of body parts and other things that are worth value, and for the potential that there's a horde with it, which is absurd if it fled away. If it was, we don't know. They don't know the circumstances. Only NPCs and people want to get in on the chase. Typical, let's go try to. There's the ice cave. We're gonna go. There's what's left of the dragon. The task. Part of fan is universally enthusiastic about the harvest of a badly wounded drake. A number of the local men will voluntarily join the expedition. The Bella brothers and several owners of the inns in the town will fund the journey to pay Cholsom's fee. In return, they miss the euphoria of a granted easy dragon kill. The Bellas and the owners get the drake's body and 3/4 of the profit from carving it up. Ventures share that booty will be dispensed only as the various parts are processed and sold off as products to the highest bidder. First task of fading adventures, a decision of where they will fall in skill, wishful thinking about the drake. State of house. Everyone in town expectantly embraces Chosum's dearest report. What they don't know is Chosum's kind of over emphasized how bad the dragon is. The dragon isn't in bad shape, but he's not as bad as what they think. And therein lies, Frankie, what are you doing now? If you knock something over, Mama's gonna have your hide. Already knocking things down as it is. That cat will climb the ceiling if she can get to it. So let me see what she's up to, because she's being gotta check. I'll give you this cat is so skinny she can worm her way into the most packed area. The wife tries to stack boxes and everything in the way so the cat cannot get back into the corners and get under the tables with the other stuff. But yeah, that's not gonna happen. Too much stuff in here anyway. Yes. What are you doing down there now? You're Frankie? What? Yeah? Okay. We're done fiddling with you. Because you're bound and determined to get into something. So come here. Come on. Come on. Yeah? Daddy can finish up this video. Now she's going to sit there and worry at the other side of the door because I'm in here and she's not. Yes, I can hear you scratching at the door. Determined kitty, yes you are. Alright. So pretty much the concept, right? We're going to go take out a dragon and harvest him. It says here their estimated retail value conservatively at 75,000 gold pieces. And size and condition of the hide, the horns, and 4 long wheels, 6 full suits of scale mail made out of dragon hide and dragon scale. Make skull shavings and all the various body components available for magic uses. And the expedition finance estimate no more than 100,000 gold pieces. Guaranteed profit. This makes for 25,000 gold pieces and evenly split among those qualified. So let's go get the dragon. All right. Then we have the information on Eldran the Frigid dragons, and then talk about dragon fear and other things like that. So good luck, sleeping dragon. Dragon's not going to take kindly to being woke up and then try to be carved up as in components. So this leads us to the last adventure, which is the Man Wolf of Galgoran, and we can pretty much sum this one up too. There is a fellow who is turning into a werewolf. He's hassling the local farm animals and things like that, and then he's now hassling potential victims and the people who are involved and want him put down. Nice picture of the dragon, the train, town, the task. First goal of interest, we discover what is happening in and around Galgoran. The plague of wolves is dangerous and misunderstood. Julia Marquis believes the beasts are here to end her family's feud with the shape changers. Lila Moscott is the idea that Kroll Kondrada is suffering from the disease, but is unsure of its diagnosis and afraid to confront the beloved old warrior. Golo Wasis dismisses the entire ugly situation as the natural order of things. Once the truth is learned, adventurers must decide whether to attempt to cure the old warrior to cleanse the town and surrounding countryside by sword. Either way, the menace is too great to be ignored by any but the most cold-hearted or most powerful parties. Further, either choice. So you have a moral dilemma. This old, well-known, upstanding warrior in his past his prime has become infected by lycanthropy. Is now unwittingly at night turning into a vampire, or I mean a werewolf, and hunting and becoming a problem. So we either got to cure him or put him down, and it's a rough call. And how do you go about dealing with it? Now, and there's a picture of the old goat himself. The plus an addition of the pack of wolves that are hunting the led by wargs, and at times by the man wolf himself. The fell brutes are a deadly menace. The pack has taken up residence in Cole's farm. They're familiar with the terrain and very possessive because the prince is a developing man wolf. Literally impossible for a lot of Julie to currently go outside to help. Now, put that there because the thing wants to flow around, and I will give you a talking head. Okay, wait, that's the okay. Werewolves in general are an interesting concept in Lord of the Rings, in Middle Earth, because theoretically speaking, they're not common at all. They're like vampires, extremely rare. They are not naturally formed. Obviously, they don't have. If you play in any other kind of fantasy game setting, for the most part, they're much larger based on the genre you're playing or the game system you're playing. Dungeons and Dragons are quite common. You can find them all over the place as the GMs decide. Sometimes in some pretty strange, unseemingly located. It's like the vampire. So the thing with in Middle Earth is we go back to the Silmarillion and some of the other works of Tolkien. There's a huge connection between Sauron and the vampires of the First Age and the werewolves of the First Age. At one time, Sauron, he was a lieutenant, Morgoth. He had his own location called the Isle of Werewolves, and he himself had been known to change shape, and it was implied this is through him that the first concept of the vampire came about, and that there are a few of these entities still floating around, and or people who have become them, and they're very rare. Very hard to find, and probably a good thing. The werewolves are the same thing. It's not common, right? And so it would be not unsurprising that Sauron, who'd had a fascination with altering things. I mean, look at the gargoyles, for example. It talks about or enhancing the existing orcs and goblins and so on. It talks about the necromancers held in Dolgoldur, Goldolder. It just shows you how large and functional that location is or was at different times in history, and how important it was to Sauron's overall plan. And wow, at Mordor, he spent more time at Dol Guldur than he did at Mordor, at his citadel there, when he could access it, when it wasn't cut off from him or until he retook it, etc. But the fact that both Mordor is just south, relatively by the map, of the Dorwinion region, and or Mirkwood and Dol Guldur is just to the west. Well, it's a little further. By my guesstimation of the map, it looks further to Dol Guldur and Mirkwood than it does to the northern reaches of the mountains surrounding Mordor. So that have these creatures or this illness somehow getting up there and getting entrenching itself. The idea is not outside the realm. It's just still a very unusual thing. You're not going to find many of these adventures in the pre-made created stuff, because it's not D&D. The Middle Earth is not Rhun or Corinne or a dozen other, I'm just saying, nice stuff, nice extra things. Quite more increasingly bigger challenges as we go. As I said, this is quite thick for an adventure module. There's a lot more material in here, and the adventures are quite detailed with lots of things. You can make an entire game campaign out of just this one module, and the module itself is very suitable for most fantasy role-playing game systems. So if you wanted to use Dungeons and Dragons in its own campaign, you could adapt this to your campaign, or a Pathfinder campaign, I would imagine. So once again, this is River Running, Middle Earth Adventure. Till next time, game on.